Good afternoon, respected members of the media. Thank you for joining us today. Your presence emphasizes the importance of discussion that has transpired at the G20 anti-corruption ministerial meeting held today under the India's presidency. I am honored to introduce Dr. Jitendra Singh, our esteemed Minister of State for Ministry of Science and Technology, Minister of State for Prime Minister's Office, Minister of State for the Department of Atomic Energy, Minister of States for Department of Space, Minister of State for the Ministry of Personal Grievances and Pension in Government of India, a distinguished figure in Indian governance. His vast experience and commitment to public welfare has driven impactful reforms. His vision for good governance and citizen empowerment showcases his dedication to India's progressive journey. Today, he will dwell into the outcome and the way forward of G20 anti-corruption ministerial meeting. We value your role in conveying these messages to the public. Now I request DG PIB Eastern Zone, Shri Bhupendra Kantolia, for the further proceeding. Thank you.
Good afternoon to my friends from the media and the dignitaries on the dais. I take this occasion to welcome the Honorable Minister, and accompanying him are Ms. S. Radha Chauhan, the Secretary DOPT, and Shri Rahul Singh, Additional Secretary DOPT. Friends, as you know, the G20 anti-corruption ministerial meeting ended today, and it was addressed virtually by the Prime Minister and physically by the Honorable Minister. And preceding this ministerial meeting were 3 days of discussions, started on the 9th of August, of the Anti-Corruption Working Group. And this was the third working group meeting that was held here in Kolkata. The other two were in Gurugram and in Rishikesh. And the deliberations of these meetings were fed into this anti-corruption ministerial meeting, which concluded today. So I will now request the Honorable Minister to make his opening remarks, and that will be followed by a question and answer session. Once the media friends start asking questions, I request them to first introduce themselves and then the organization they are representing. So first I'll request the Honorable Minister to make his opening remarks.
Thank you. Since at the outset, thank you, friends, for sparing your time. You've all been witness to the proceedings since this morning, so there's hardly anything to add to what you've already witnessed. But just to underline some of the highlights which we might take as the takeaway message from here. You would have noticed, as is being mentioned, the proceedings began with a message from the Honorable Prime Minister. So to my mind, that at once sends out 2 or 3 indicators. A, the priority, the importance, the significance, none less than the Prime Minister of India accords to this menace of corruption, which is globally faced and a global challenge now. B, ever since Modi ji has taken over as Prime Minister in 2014, India has been in the forefront of taking up the global issues, the global concerns. If you see in entirety the range, beginning from climate change or climate concerns, to clean energy, to technology, to quantum initiatives, to space missions, India is now a frontline nation. And maybe there is a huge departure because these are some of the concerns about which till a few years ago the world did not take us seriously or thought we did not have much to say or we didn't have a view on these issues because we were quite oblivious of that. But now we are in a position where we are not only ready to take up global challenges, but also to provide global remedies. And the most heartening feature is the rest of the world looks up to Prime Minister Modi, looks up to India for cues and for direction. And when we sit on this G20 platform, I think it's not without significance that the very first meeting that Prime Minister Modi addressed G20 after taking over, he had mentioned this challenge of corruption and the fugitive economic offenders. And as has been the approach of this government, it doesn't give up the issues. It tends to follow them, also carry them to logical conclusions. And thereafter, subsequently, in 2018, Honorable Prime Minister came out with a 9-point agenda for all the G20 countries to follow, so that we could seek to impose a check on the transnational corrupt practices, on the fugitive offenders fleeing from one country to the other, taking shelter there, sometimes taking undue advantage of a different kind of law prevailing over there, and also in the process managing to park their ill-gotten money or ill-gotten wealth in places where it would be beyond the reach of law prevalent in that country. And to follow up that, we have had a series of meetings, even this year when G20 was hosted by India, which is again a great matter of pride and privilege for us. So I think the highlights of this year's proceedings and the ministerial that happened today was that we have been able to carry forward the 9-point agenda of the Prime Minister and try to give it a practical shape by coming out with 3 broad sets of principles, which have been in the final document named as high-level principles. High-level principle number 1, number 2, and number 3. And the high-level principle number 1 deals with the strengthening of law enforcement related international cooperation and international sharing for combating corruption. The high-level principle number 2 deals with the strengthening of asset recovery mechanisms for combating corruption. As I was mentioning a few moments earlier, money parked at a different place or a relatively safer place from the point of view of the offender. And thirdly, high-level principle number 3 deals with promoting integrity and effectiveness of public bodies and authorities responsible for preventing and combating corruption, because these bodies, such bodies or similar bodies across the world, though may be located in different countries, have to function in unison, in close collaboration in order to achieve optimum results. Similarly, in addition to that, a compendium of good practices was also published or released this morning. The compendium deals with the strengthening the role of audit in tackling corruption. And I must give credit to our team in the ministry who have, and Secretary Madam Chauhan, Rahul, the entire team has singularly worked to introduce the agenda of gender-related corruption, which is possibly a new aspect being introduced to this entire campaign against corruption, which is being taken up at the international level, because we have seen the kind of vulnerability and the exploitation that happens more often so in case of corruption-related issues which happen to be connected with the women folk. And therefore, anti-corruption strategies and ensuring women's meaningful participation and leadership in preventing and combating corruption. And just to add to your information, we had about 154 delegates comprising of ministers, senior officials, 10 invitee countries, and 7 heads of different international organizations. And all of them were unanimous in expressing their support for the global cooperation in combating this menace of corruption. And I would also, through you all, put on record, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Italy for their support in being the co-chair of the anti-corruption working group for building consensus on a number of crucial issues. And we look forward to carry it further from where we are in the next G20, which happens to be in Brazil. Thank you.
Okay, start with the questions now. Can you please rise and ask the question?
Rakesh Kumar Singh, my name is Rakesh Kumar Singh, executive editor. डॉक्टर साहब, जिस तरह से आपने कहा कि भारत जो है फ्रंटलाइन नेशन है, क्लाइमेट चेंज की बात हो या क्लीन एनर्जी को लेकर, लेकिन दो एजेंडा आज प्रधानमंत्री ने भी साफ तौर पे कहा कि जीरो टॉलरेंस पॉलिसी अगेंस्ट करप्शन, साथ ही साथ फ्यूगिटिव इकोनॉमिक ऑफेंडर, दो मुख्य एजेंडा हैं। उसको लेकर जो ये एंटी करप्शन वर्किंग ग्रुप का जो मिनिस्ट्रियल मीटिंग हुई, क्या ऑन बोर्ड G20 के अधिकतर जो मिनिस्टर्स हैं उनकी राय क्या भारत राय से मिलती है, और इसको लेकर क्या इसको जो एक जॉइंट अगर कहें कि स्टेटमेंट, तो उसको लेकर क्या सहमति बनती दिख रही है, खासतौर पर फ्यूगिटिव इकोनॉमी के जो ऑफेंडर हैं?
जैसा आपने कहा, मुझे लगता है कि सबसे महत्वपूर्ण बात यह है कि पिछले 9-10 वर्षों में प्रधानमंत्री श्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी के नेतृत्व में भारत को एक न केवल भौगोलिक भूमिका निभाने का अवसर मिला है, बल्कि अग्रणी भूमिका, बहुत सारे इनिशिएटिव्स भारत ने लिए हैं। और यदि आप तुलना करें कि इससे पहले कुछ वर्ष पहले तक ये सारे विषय जिनको आपने उल्लेखित किया, चाहे वो क्लाइमेट को लेकर के था, चाहे वो क्लीन एनर्जी को लेकर के था, चाहे वो अंतरिक्ष को लेकर के था, या चाहे वो भ्रष्टाचार के प्रति या भ्रष्टाचार के विरुद्ध अभियान का था, इन विषयों को लेकर के विश्व के दूसरे देश बहुत ज़्यादा गंभीरता से भारत के बारे में नहीं सोचते थे। उन्हें लगता है कि शायद भारत की प्राथमिकताओं में है भी कि नहीं है, क्योंकि भारत की अपनी बहुत सारी और उलझने हैं। लेकिन प्रधानमंत्री मोदी जी ने ये एक नया बदलाव भी लाया विश्व भर में, हमारी सोच में और दुनिया की सोच में, कि जितने भी भौगोलिक चुनौतियां हैं उनका सामना करने के लिए भारत तैयार है। भारत की क्षमता, भारत का सामर्थ्य, और विशेषकर कोविड के खिलाफ जिस तरह से विजय प्राप्त करने में हम सफल रहे, जबकि दुनिया के छोटे छोटे देश तिलमिला गए, हमने न केवल सफलतापूर्वक उसका मुकाबला किया मोदी जी के नेतृत्व में, बल्कि उपहार के तौर पर दुनिया को पहला कोविड DNA वैक्सीन भी दिया। उसके बाद सारी दुनिया और जो अपने आप को विकसित देश कहते थे, वो मोदी जी को और भारत को न केवल गंभीरता से उसके व्यूज़, उसके राय जानने के लिए तत्पर रहते हैं, बल्कि उनको लगता है कि शायद हमें कुछ दिशा भी मिलेगी। और आज के विषय को लेकर के भी ये बात एक बार पुनः प्रमाणित होती है कि जो प्रधानमंत्री बनने के बाद जो सर्वप्रथम G20 जो संबोधित की थी प्रधानमंत्री मोदी जी ने, उन्होंने ये विषय उठाया था, ट्रांसनेशनल करप्शन। जैसे आपने कहा कि फ्यूजिटिव ऑफेंडर्स, एक जगह कोई इस प्रकार का गुनाह हुआ है या किसी प्रकार से पैसे को लेकर के या और किसी तरह का ऑफेंस हुआ है, तो किस प्रकार से कोई बार अक्सर देखा गया कि अपराधी जाकर के दूसरे देश में शरण लेने का प्रयास करता है जहां पर कानून भिन्न हो, या पर वो जो उसका संदिग्ध जो उसने जो पैसा इकट्ठा किया है, जो वेल्थ इकट्ठी की है, उसको किसी ऐसी जगह रख दिया जाए जहां पर वो कानून के हाथ ना पहुंचते हो। तो इनके लिए एक सामूहिक युद्ध की आवश्यकता है। आज प्रधानमंत्री जी ने अपने संबोधन में सुबह एक बार फिर से एक बात पुनः दोहराई और रीइटरेट की कि जॉइंट एफर्ट, ये उनके शब्द थे, जॉइंट फाइट एंड कलेक्टिव एफर्ट। और हमें इस बात का संतोष भी है, खुशी भी है, विंडिकेशन भी है कि प्रधानमंत्री जी ने ही इस बात को आगे बढ़ाते हुए सन 2018 में G20 की अगली जो मीटिंग हुई है उसमें ये 9 बिंदुओं पर आधारित एजेंडा भी दिया। और एक बड़ी संतोषजनक बात यह है कि जितने भी इसके सदस्य हैं, सबने सर्वसम्मति से इस एजेंडे को स्वीकार भी किया, इसको पालन भी किया है और इसको आगे बढ़ाने का भी कार्य किया है। और ये उसी का नतीजा है कि आज हम ये 3 मूलभूत नियमों पर आधारित एक रेजोल्यूशन लेकर के आए हैं कि किस प्रकार से कानून को मजबूत किया जाए ताकि अंतर्राष्ट्रीय सहयोग और ज़्यादा सुचारू हो, सार्थक हो, भले ही वो इंफॉर्मेशन शेयरिंग हो, एक दूसरे के साथ सूचनाओं का आदान प्रदान, ताकि भ्रष्टाचार पर अंकुश लगाया जाए। दूसरा, किस प्रकार एसेट रिकवरी मैकेनिज्म्स, जैसा मैं अभी कह रहा था कि कहीं और जाकर के पैसा रख दिया गया जहां कानून भिन्न है और अपराधी को लगता है कि शायद ऐसा करने से वो बच निकलेगा, तो किस प्रकार इस तरह की परिस्थिति से निपटा जाए अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर एक सोच बनाकर। और तीसरा, जो ऐसी संस्थाएं हैं, जो ऐसे अदारे हैं भिन्न भिन्न देशों में अलग अलग स्वरूप में, जो भ्रष्टाचार के विषय से निपटने की जिम्मेदारी निभाते हैं, उन्हें किस प्रकार से और ज़्यादा सशक्त भी किया जाए और एक समान पद्धति प्रणाली का पालन करने के लिए सक्षम किया जाए। और मुझे विश्वास है कि जिस प्रकार से आज सर्वसम्मति का इजहार हुआ है सभी प्रतिनिधि देशों के द्वारा और प्रतिनिधि संस्थाओं के द्वारा, आज हम जहां खड़े हैं इससे आगे हम बढ़ने में, पेशकदमी करने में सफल रहेंगे।
Can you identify yourself, your organization and name?
So this is Pritesh Basu from Bortoman Putrika. So today we are discussing about, and this is press conference about the anti-corruption ministerial meeting. In an international level, we are talking about the anti-corruption issues. But sir, often we find the opposition parties raise question saying that when the Prime Minister goes abroad, he talks about United India and same rule for all. But it differs in terms of opposition states. But at the same time, we find, and they also raise a queer thing that the central agencies, quote unquote, the central agencies like ED, CBI, is too much proactive and active in opposition states than, quote unquote, double engine states. So when we are talking in the terms of the international platform in connection with the anti-corruption issues, so people are a bit confused when you move around in buses and trams. People say that what is the correct thing, whether the ED, CBI is proactive or they are doing the right job. So people actually confused. So what's your take in this case, sir?
I think if you do a little bit of introspection, try to go back and try to compare the retrospective with the prospective, the answer would be there inside you. Those who say that the present government is using or misusing all these institutions are actually speaking from their own mindset. They are speaking from the UPA times when they were indulging like that. They were manipulating the agencies to their advantage, to their political interests, to the extent that Supreme Court was constrained to say parrot in kitchen, parrot in cage. And remember that remark was made when it was a Congress-led UPA government. Under Prime Minister Modi, the government follows all the norms and the values enshrined in the Constitution. These bodies function independently and there is no interference at all. Secondly, just to prove it in a hard way, most of these states that you are referring to have withdrawn the general consent given to the CBI, which ideally was done to allow the CBI jurisdiction into their respective states. If you compare that to prior to 2014, you would recall that CBI had proceeded in a very big way against the Chief Minister's office, the then Chief Minister in Ahmedabad, also the then Home Minister of Gujarat. But not once did the then Gujarat government withdraw the consent to the CBI to proceed in that state. They rather cooperated with it. And at the end of the day, they proved themselves not guilty. So I think if we, all of us, you and I, if we actually believe in the spirit of Constitution, that is the spirit, not the one that is being referred to you by some of those who have their own vested interests and those who have much to hide than to show.
Yeah. Just one request that I request our media friends to restrict their questions to G20. Yeah, please carry on.
So, sir, I have two questions. First is you spoke about gender-related corruption. So, what can you explain a bit more so that what were the trigger points for bringing gender-related corruption? And the second question is, sir, you also spoke about strengthening asset recovery. So, can you also tell us a bit more about the increase in asset recovery over the past few years, especially after collective steps, cohesive steps were taken in globally? So if you can elaborate a bit on that.
For the first part of it, I'll invite Mrs. Radha Chauhan to come forward because she has been very thoughtfully working on this aspect of gender-related corruption.
Does this work or only this
No,
work?
it will work. Yeah, it will work. This will work.
This is working. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
On the new thread that we introduced in this anti-corruption working group that related to gender-sensitive handling of anti-corruption initiatives globally. There are global researchers that of late have indicated to an impact of corruption-related activities very differently on the women part of the citizenry. They are more vulnerable to the implications of a corrupt regime, a corrupt governance system, a system that is opaque, not transparent, a system that is not equitably accessible. In all of these very key aspects of governance, normal delivery of public services to citizens, where the woman is the partaker of that particular service, a woman as a citizen per se, woman as a family householder, and woman as a mother of a vulnerable young child or infant. All of these aspects should be taken into account while you deal with challenges that each of the global governance systems address when they act against corruption. So there's a gender aspect to the way the mechanisms, the governance systems, the way the processes within the government, CBI, ED, ये आपके जो मशीनरी हैं और ग्लोबली एंटी करप्शन के जितने मशीनरी हैं उन मशीनरीज के प्रोसेसेस और एक तो डायरेक्ट इम्पैक्ट है जहाँ पे आपका एंटी करप्शन से रिलेटेड एक्टिविटीज़ के अगेंस्ट गवर्नमेंट काम करती है उसमें महिलाओं के ऊपर किस तरह का इम्पैक्ट आता है एंड इनडायरेक्टली when it is corruption and it impacts the efficiency of the government, the transparency of the overall governance systems, there is a very different and multiplier impact on the gender related aspects, which is what we have tried to highlight. We have had global participants and आज मंत्री जी के सामने जो आज का deliberations हुआ उसमें many of the countries actually specifically took on this aspect of the overall 3 working groups that we had done, and they said that this gender aspect of addressing corruption and its challenges must be continued forward, and more insights, more inputs across the countries, across globally, initiatives that have been taken must be highlighted, shared, so that there is a general improvement. Not only the vulnerable section of the society is handled better, but more than that, empower the women in the citizenry to fight against corruption in a more effective and impactful manner. So I think this is a great step forward, and this we hope that in the next working group deliberations and discourses, this will find a constancy and this will further roll out into a pivotal part of the overall anti-corruption discourse across the globe?
I think as far as the second part of it is concerned, as you recall, it was stated in the Parliament also on the floor of the House that after this government came in and certain decisive steps were taken, there has been a recovery of as much as about 1.8 billion US dollars, which has been brought back and deposited in the public sector banks. So, in other words, a headway has been made and we hope to go beyond this.
सर, मैं विशाल श्रेष्ठ दैनिक जागरण से हूँ इधर सर। कोलकाता में सर ऐसे समय ये बैठक हुई है जब बंगाल में भ्रष्टाचार एक बहुत बड़ा मुद्दा है। बहुत सारे भ्रष्टाचार के मामले सामने आ चुके हैं, राज्य के मंत्री तक जेल जा चुके हैं, अदालत के आदेश पर बहुत सारे मामलों की जांच भी चल रही है। तो इस पर सर आप क्या कहेंगे?
पर ये G20 से संबंधित नहीं है, मैं पहले
लेकिन ये भ्रष्टाचार से जुड़ा मामला तो है।
हम उम्मीद करते हैं कि आप जैसे सज्जन यहाँ बैठे हुए हैं तो जिनके कानों तक ये पैगाम पहुँचना चाहिए इस बैठक का पहुँचेगा और उनको भी सद्बुद्धि आएगी।
लेकिन ये भ्रष्टाचार से ही जुड़ा मामला है।
जी जी जी, वही कह रहा हूँ। और आपने कुछ भ्रष्ट लोगों का उल्लेख भी किया, तो उसके विस्तार में ना जाते हुए मैं कह रहा हूँ कि यहाँ पर अगर ये बैठक हुई है इस प्रकार की इस विषय को लेकर के, तो जिस विषय का उनके जिनके साथ संबंध है उनको भी शायद सद्बुद्धि आने का अवसर रहे, कुछ समझ आए। 1.80 billion.
This is over what period of time, sir? Since which year?
In the last few years, it's been only 3-4 years or so.
This will be the last question. We are running out of
maybe
time.
about 5 years. Yeah.
नमस्कार सर, मैं मिलन छत्री, DSTV इंडिया न्यूज़ एंड DSTV दार्जिलिंग से। सर एक्चुअली मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है, जो एंटी करप्शन जो मीटिंग रखा गया यहाँ पे, आज जो बातचीत हुआ, पहले भी जो मीटिंग में बातचीत हुआ, जो G20 शामिल हुआ जो कंट्री सब है उन लोग को साथ जो आप लोग सहमति जो बातचीत हुई है, तो आपको लगता है जो हमारा देश जो ये प्रोग्राम के ऊपर में जो बातचीत कर रहा है, आगे का दिन में भी यही चीज़ हमारा देश को फॉलो करेंगे? अगला जो G20 का जो कंट्री सब है जो एंटी करप्शन मशीनरीज उन लोग यूज़ कर सकते हैं, ऐसा कुछ लेकर गंभीर बातचीत हुआ क्या नहीं, इस विषय लेकर जानना चाहता हूँ सर।
नहीं, भ्रष्टाचार को लेकर के गंभीर बातचीत हुआ और सबकी सहमति भी रही, इसमें किसी की दूसरी राय नहीं थी, क्योंकि इसका जो दुष्प्रभाव है उसका सामना सभी देशों को करना पड़ रहा है और धीरे धीरे ये जो अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर इस तरह के भ्रष्टाचार के जो हमें विषय सामने आते हैं कि कहीं एक जगह अपराध होता है और दूसरी जगह जा कर के शरण लेने का प्रयास होता है, तो ये केवल भारत तक ही सीमित नहीं रहा विषय, ये अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर आ चुका है और सभी देशों को लगता है कि कुछ देश तो पहले से ही इसका सामना कर चुके हैं या कर रहे हैं और दूसरों को लगता है कि कल उनके साथ भी ऐसा हो सकता है। तो इसलिए इस विषय को लेकर के कोई दो राय नहीं है।
Okay, thank you very much, Honorable Minister and the officials on the dais, and also a big thanks to the media present here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.